So we're going to be talking a bit about learning and teaching now. So thinking about preparing your learners and preparing yourself for the teaching session. Um, so I'd like you to just pause for a moment and think about what learning means to you. So what's your definition of learning? And it's useful to gauge where you are in terms of your understanding of adult learning, as this will impact on your teaching. So here are a few definitions of learning, and it's useful to think about where your definition of or your understanding fits most closely with, and also how this has changed over time. So from initially being thought of as an act of giving information and learning, retaining information, to learners being able to actually process information that's presented to them. Where, as per Piaget, the definition of learning is much more about how learners construct knowledge, and that's in an iterative way based on new experiences and really making sense of the world around us. You may have heard of Mezirow and the theory of transformative learning, which suggests that when learners are posed with a new situation and something that doesn't necessarily sit comfortably, a transformation occurs and there's a change in one's understanding of self and one's entire belief system about that and therefore behaviour. And that's known as constructive cognitive constructivism. And that learning becomes a new creation. And for me, an example of this was a clinical humanities stage 2 student that I had last year, who was initially quite skeptical about the clinical humanities and couldn't see the relevance to his clinical learning. And it was actually at a poetry workshop where we were looking at walking in the shoes of others and seeing the world through the eyes of others, through and being patient experiences being expressed through poetry, where that was a pivotal moment for him, and that really changed his understanding and his understanding of the relevance for clinical humanities to him. So there was a real example of where we could see transformative learning taking place. And there are further theories, such as the last definition, which suggests that we learn in groups, in communities of practice. And again, another example where I've seen this really come to life is within our stage 2 GP tutors, where through a WhatsApp group and our various training events, the tutors, especially the more experienced tutors, have sort of organically supported the newer tutors and formed a community of practice and where group learning has taken place.
So we are encouraging you to think about what sort of a teacher you would like to be, and also, I guess, what sort of a teacher we would like you to be. So Biggs has described these three levels. So level one is, what I imagine a lecturer might do who isn't being particularly interactive. The lecturer knows what he or she is going to say, is a sage on the stage. Is there to transmit knowledge? So very, very sort of teacher centered. With level two, the focus is slightly changed. So it's still teacher centered, but rather than focusing on what the student is or needs, it's focusing on what the teacher does. So you might vary your method and you might transmit some concepts, but it's not really taking into account our learners. And this is really where we want you guys to be, which is sort of level three, which is really thinking about your students, them as individuals, what their learning needs are, really tailoring your approach. And, we're going to do lots of practice soon for that. And thinking, what is it that this, student is doing, and how can I support them? So really, and it's a bit more challenging when you've got a group of students, but really thinking about that individual in front of you and facilitating their learning. And if you've got kids, you have probably heard of the growth mindset. Lots of schools are talking about this, and we have a video to show you. I'll show you it later. But I think some of our students will kind of fall into, and maybe even some of you guys will fall into these mindsets. So a fixed mindset is where you think, well, actually, I'm only this intelligent, obstacles feel kind of challenging, criticism might feel challenging, and then it sort of also breeds a degree of competitiveness. Maybe kind of seeing others succeed is quite challenging. Whereas on the other hand, if we adopted a kind of more flexible approach and a growth mindset to say, actually, you and I, we're all on a journey. I haven't got to where I need to yet. I'm constantly learning and developing every day. And as GPs, we know that things change all the time. And we really want our students to know that. So we're not expecting them to know everything at the moment. We want them to kind of be able to tackle obstacles and challenges and gaps in their knowledge, just be honest about them and think, well, how will I fill those? How will I learn from this? And actually collaborate, thinking back to Layla's description of the communities of practice, especially when they're out in general practice in year 2 with 8 other students. We really want them working together, and in the future working together for their patients, their communities, or other groups that they belong to. So I think a learning needs assessment is the thing that I think we should all start with when we do any training session. But I think often is forgotten or skimmed over because we think, well, I know what I need to teach, or I know what I'm going to do in this session. And what a learning needs assessment is doing is thinking about the person in front of you, is really thinking, what do they already know? There is no point, telling somebody lots of information if they know it already. It's a waste of your time and theirs. What you want to do is build on their knowledge, and kind of see where the gap is, and how you can fill it, or ideally how they can fill it, what their next steps will be. So seeing where they're at, where they need to be, and how we kind of close that gap. And it's something that needs to be done at the beginning of every session. So I'm just going to get you to pause again and just think about how you will know what to teach. You might just want to get a little notepad, take a little pause, and we will discuss this when we are face to face. How do you know what to teach your students?